Notorious underworld figure Gavin "Capable" Preston has been shot dead outside a Keilor cafe.
Up to 10 shots shatter the silence. On the ground outside Sweet Lulu's cafe, Gavin "Capable" Preston was clinging to life. Shot in the head but still breathing before one of Melbourne's most notorious gangland figures was ultimately silenced.
When Gavin "Capable" Preston, a well-known Melbourne gangster, got out of prison in April 2023 after serving 11 years for killing a drug dealer, the criminal world and Victorian police were on edge. Preston had previously been connected to the shooting of ex-Bandito biker Toby Mitchell and was involved in a plan to kill Melbourne crime boss Mick Gatto. His release came with strict conditions. Preston had just finished serving time for shooting ice dealer Adam Curry in a North Melbourne apartment back in February 2012. But only 6 months after his release, in broad daylight, Preston was brutally gunned down. He was shot 10 times while having a meal outside a busy cafe called Sweet Lulu's in Melbourne's Keilor village on a Saturday, September 9th. One of Melbourne's most unpredictable and dangerous criminals was dead, taken out in a storm of bullets in front of shocked onlookers. As the Victorian police scrambled to catch the killers and figure out the reasons behind the hit, they knew they had to act fast to prevent the situation from spiraling into more gang violence. Gavin Preston was born on the Sunshine Coast, but grew up in Melbourne's western suburbs. Even though he came from a stable family, his teenage years were spent in and out of juvenile detention for violent acts. By the time he turned 18, he already had a long criminal record with charges like armed robbery, assault, and carrying weapons. In the early 90s, as a young adult, Preston's time behind bars kept growing. His first big conviction was for assaulting a shopkeeper, Philip Stiles, in Northcote in 1991. Not long after, he was locked up again for viciously beating up a football fan, Greg Wilson, with a stick, just because Wilson looked at him the wrong way. While in prison, Preston didn't back down from trouble. He was involved in several brutal fights with other inmates, often landing him extra time in solitary confinement. During his stays in Pentridge Prison, one of Melbourne's toughest, Preston's circle of allies included notorious figures like Matthew the General Johnson, who had killed drug lord Carl Williams. Despite being released on license in the mid-90s, Preston couldn't leave his criminal ways behind. He became an accomplice in an armed bank robbery in St. Albans, where he terrorized the staff and customers with a .22 pistol, making off with $24,000 in a stolen car. Preston often blamed his violent behavior on the system, claiming that his life of crime was a result of his constant imprisonment. While in prison, Preston continued his violent streak. In one shocking incident, he and Matthew Johnson, armed with knives and a pickaxe, put a prison guard through a terrifying experience. They attempted to break through reinforced glass to attack a rival inmate, but the guard managed to lock the target in a cell just as armed officers arrived, saving the inmate's life. When Preston was released in 2007, he tried to turn his life around, but it wasn't long before he fell back into his old ways. After the devastating loss of his brother Richard to a heroin overdose in 2011, Preston, now marked with commando-style tattoos, returned to his violent roots. In February 2012, Adam Curry became another victim of Preston's brutal ways, paying the ultimate price for being in his path. Adam Curry was one of Victoria's top ice dealers and a close partner of amphetamine kingpin John Higgs. In the months before Curry's murder, Gavin Preston was already under police surveillance, suspected of shooting biker boss Toby Mitchell on November 28, 2011, outside the Banditos clubhouse. Mitchell, the leader of the gang's Australian chapter, was hit in the stomach, back, and hip, but despite losing a kidney, he survived. True to the code of the streets, Mitchell refused to cooperate with the police. Just 3 days after the attempted hit, Preston and infamous underworld figure Nabil Mad Lebo Magni were arrested after leading police on a high-speed chase through Melbourne's CBD. They drove the wrong way up the busy Collins Street tramline, with police later finding an unregistered firearm, blood-stained clothing, and a curious floor plan for a gym opposite the Banditos' headquarters. Although there was no DNA linking Preston to Mitchell's shooting, authorities suspected they had accidentally thwarted an imminent hit on Mick Gatto, a powerful figure in Australia's organized crime scene. Preston had been previously investigated for attempting to extort money from Gatto's construction company. Despite police objections, Preston was granted bail and released on December 22, 2011. Following his release, Victorian police launched Operation Encryption, which involved putting Preston under close surveillance and tapping his phone, hoping to catch him before he could strike again. On the night Adam Curry was killed, Victorian police stopped monitoring Gavin Preston, just 30 minutes before he executed Curry at a Canning Street apartment. The police surveillance team, nicknamed the Dogs, left at 12:25 a.m. Preston had arrived at Curry's busy apartment in a Holden Commodore around 10:40 p.m. There was some heated back and forth between the two outside, while inside, there were others present, people known to the police and drug users stopping by to buy drugs. By 11:57 p.m., Curry and Preston were alone. Moments later, Curry was dead, shot twice in the head. A separate surveillance camera, which had been monitoring Curry's house due to his involvement in the methamphetamine trade, captured footage of Preston, hooded and wearing gloves, leaving the property at 12:54 a.m., just minutes before a neighbor called emergency services, reporting loud screams from the apartment. Preston was arrested the next day and charged with murder. He was held on remand at Bar 1, Victoria's maximum security prison. During his 9-day murder trial in May 2015, stunning details emerged. Preston pleaded guilty to defensive homicide after prosecutors accepted his claim that Curry had pulled a gun on him and the fatal shooting occurred during a struggle. It was also revealed that Preston had been in regular contact with Curry in the days leading up to the incident. He believed Curry was planning to rat him out for a crime and was trying to collect a $2,500 drug debt from him at the time. Preston claimed that he went to Adam Curry's flat to try and broker peace between himself and notorious criminal Christopher Badness Bince, a close ally of Toby Mitchell. Preston, paranoid and on edge, believed Bince was plotting to blow up his car in retaliation for Mitchell's shooting. Following the attack on Curry, Bince reportedly took things further, attaching a tracking device to Preston's car and even stalking Preston's partner. It later came out that Bince had entrusted Curry with explosives meant for a car bomb while Bince was out of the state. This added another layer of tension to the already dangerous situation. On August 11, 2015, Preston was sentenced to 11 years in prison for the murder. Before being led to the dock for sentencing, he couldn't resist taunting a detective from the Piranha Task Force who was sitting in the courtroom. Preston smirked and said, "I reckon you've lost this one, champ. What did you tell everyone? You've never lost a case." With a smug grin, he added that he'd be out of jail before the detective retired. Despite his cocky attitude, Preston was a marked man behind bars. His violent history and dangerous connections meant that life in prison was far from safe. Gavin Preston was one of the founding members of Prisoners of War, a notorious gang created to target anyone who cooperated with police. However, in a cruel twist, the gang he helped form turned on him during his prison stint for the Adam Curry killing. In 2014, Preston was ambushed and brutally stabbed 9 times in a video-recorded assault by 5 gang members who used knives, spikes, and blades. The attack left Preston with multiple slashes to his face, neck, and a deep 15 centimeters cut along his jawline. Ironically, just moments before the violent attack, Preston and his attackers had shared a brotherly exchange, hugging and shaking hands in the prison yard. As Preston served the remainder of his sentence, his troubles only escalated. He found himself in the crosshairs of George Marogi, a feared drug baron, murderer, and fellow inmate at Bar 1 prison. Marogi harbored deep resentment toward Preston, having already botched an earlier attempt to kill Preston's ally, Nabil Mad Lebo Magnis, who was later gunned down in January 2020 while sleeping in his car. Fueled by the loss of his close friend, Marogi's hatred for Preston only grew. Nabil Mad Lebo Magni had supposedly threatened not just to beat up, but also to rape Jesse Marogi, the younger brother of George Marogi. George was serving a hefty 32-year sentence for the brutal murder of Kadir Ors, who went by the nickname Cross. Furious about the threats against his brother, George lived up to his nickname, reportedly putting a $1 million bounty on Preston's head to put an end to the ongoing feud. On a peaceful spring Saturday morning, while Preston enjoyed a glass of orange juice outside Sweet Lulu's Cafe in Melbourne's Keilor East, he faced his final reckoning. In a hail of bullets, his colorful and tumultuous life came to a violent end. But who was really behind Preston's death? Rumors swirling in the underworld suggested that he was targeted by members of the Comanchero Club because he refused to remove a large, visible tattoo of the club from his head. But would the gang really go as far as to kill a former associate over a perceived slight? In the months leading up to his public execution, Preston was tangled up in all sorts of shady dealings. There were mysterious arson attacks hitting several tobacco stores in Melbourne, and Preston's name kept coming up in connection with those incidents. At the same time, a sinister plot emerged involving an attempt to steal the body of George Morogi's brother, which marked Preston as a target. Compounding the chaos, George Morogi's sister died unexpectedly at the age of 30 after contracting COVID-19. In a bizarre twist, two masked intruders wearing gas masks entered a Melbourne mausoleum and attempted to exhume the body. While their plot failed, they did manage to steal a $100,000 ring from the corpse. If their intention was to extort or punish Morogi for his rivalry with Preston, they definitely stirred the pot. Ultimately, it seemed like multiple figures from the underworld wanted Preston dead. However, it was rumored that tensions really boiled over due to Preston's alleged theft of trucks from the Morogi family's transport business, pushing the situation to its breaking point. In the eyes of Preston's executioners, he was marked as a dead man walking, not because of his violent reputation, but because he was running out of friends willing to back him up. His brunch with Abbas Mania Jr., Nabil's son, turned out to be his last meal. On Old Calder Highway at 10:20 a.m. on September 9th, two gunmen opened fire while Preston sat at a table on the sidewalk. Abbas Jr. managed to escape, suffering wounds to his stomach and upper body while chaos erupted around them. Preston collapsed, riddled with bullets, and the attackers fled the scene. Though the gangster bled out on the ground, the attackers made a series of blunders. They escaped in an Audi Q5 and drove to Blair Court at the corner of King Solomon Park, where they attempted to set the vehicle on fire to destroy any DNA evidence. In the process, one of the assailants burned his hand. They then switched vehicles to a black Volkswagen Polo, which was later found abandoned 3 kilometers away in Cottis Place. Thankfully, a quick-thinking resident doused the blazing Audi with a garden hose, providing the police with a goldmine of evidence. Detectives soon found witnesses who reported seeing 2 men dressed entirely in black, trying to torch the car and removing 2 backpacks from it. Task force detectives got to work, trying to figure out if Preston had been double-crossed by someone close to him. Adding a twist to the drama, Sabrine Magni, the daughter of Nabil Mad Lebo Magnai and sister to Abbas, was dating Jesse Morogi, George's son. Despite the bitter rivalry between their families, the unlikely couple openly flaunted their relationship on social media, raising eyebrows all around. Given Jesse's motive and the ample opportunity he had to carry out an assassination, the pieces of this dangerous puzzle started to fit together. Sabrine and Preston had met at the Crown Casino Resort in Melbourne to try to clear the air between them. But was it really believable that Jesse would order a hit on Preston while he was out enjoying a meal with his girlfriend's brother? The police were also keen to investigate whether Abbas Jr. had lured Preston into a false sense of security. Sure, he had taken a flesh wound in the attack, but could Abbas Jr. really have orchestrated Preston's murder? Just days after the shooting, rumors began to circulate, and it quickly became apparent that a Sydney connection was looming large in the execution. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that there were deeper ties and motives at play, suggesting that Preston's violent end was not just a random act of gang warfare, but part of a larger, more complicated web of betrayal and revenge. 46 days after the attack, on Wednesday, October 23rd, 2023, police made their move, arresting Sydney tradie Jaden Tito in a dawn raid at his home in Bradbury. Heavily armed tactical units swooped in to take one of the alleged gunmen as authorities worked to piece together the origins of the hit. Once a promising NRL star, Tito was extradited to Melbourne to appear at Crown Court on October 26th. Detective Superintendent Janet Stevenson stated that Tito was a key player in the shooting, but also noted that police were still on the hunt for several others, and the exact motive behind the shooting was still a mystery. In November 2023, Rabi Zahab, a Yaguna native, was also questioned by the Victorian Crime Command while he was at Long Bay Prison in Sydney. Zahab was awaiting sentencing for unrelated drug supply and weapons charges. Although he has not been formally charged in connection with Preston's death, Police indicated that he remains a person of interest. Jaden Tito was held in custody as the investigation continued. Meanwhile, Gavin Preston was laid to rest at Altona Memorial Park in Melbourne's west. His burial site features a gold plaque engraved with his nickname, Gavin Capable Preston. Below it, a small wooden plaque reads the phrase, "It is what it is," marking the end of the road for one of Melbourne's most infamous mobsters.
This story is about one of Melbourne's most notorious criminals, a hitman who became infamous during the city's violent gang wars in the late 90s and early 2000s. Known for his ruthless tactics, Andrew Benjamin "Benji" Venan was a major player behind several high-profile killings that shook the Melbourne crime scene to its core. Born on November 16, 1975, Benji grew up in Sunshine, a suburb in western Melbourne. During his childhood and early teens, he was an altar boy at St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Church in the nearby suburb of Sunshine West. Benji really started to make a name for himself as an amateur boxer, even making it onto the state team. The legendary Olympic boxing coach Bo Garing used to call him a whippersnapper. But it wasn't until the police showed up at the gym that Coach Garing found out about Benji's less savory activities. So, why were the police after Benji? Well, back in 1993, when he was just 17, Benji and a couple of his friends got caught after they pulled off an armed robbery. They had ambushed a cigarette delivery truck in West Sunshine, handcuffed the salesman, covered his eyes with heavy black tape, and threw him into the back of a van. Before they drove off to a more secluded spot, Benji and his friends transferred cigarettes valued at over $28,000 into another vehicle. The salesman they'd kidnapped was lucky to escape. Benji was arrested shortly after the heist. He owned up to his part in the crime, but refused to rat out his accomplices, one of whom was rumored to be his close friend, Dino Debra. Dino, known for his aggressive behavior, was Benji's best mate, and together they had a serious penchant for crime. After Benji's conviction, law enforcement found the stash of stolen cigarettes hidden under his bed, which led to him receiving a 3-year sentence at the Tan Detention Center for young offenders. During a brief period of home leave from detention, Benji and Debra decided it was payback time for the cops. Since Benji was already serving the maximum sentence for a juvenile, he knew that any additional crimes committed during his leave wouldn't extend his jail time. During his time on home leave, Benji and Debra decided to target an off-duty officer by stealing his private vehicle. They drove it out of the city and set it on fire. While rummaging through the glove box, they stumbled upon a diary containing the contact details of the Sunshine Criminal Investigation Branch officers. Seized by a moment of impulsive anger, Benji dialed a number and unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse at the officer who had charged him with the cigarette robbery. However, his plan backfired spectacularly when the officer immediately recognized his voice. This prompted a swift police response to apprehend Benji. 2 years later, at 21, Benji was finally out of detention and quickly fell in with a local gang known as the Sunshine Crew. This gang had a notorious reputation throughout the western suburbs of Melbourne in the 90s. Known for their volatile and ruthless nature, they were always on the lookout for quick money-making schemes. Starting as schoolboy petty thieves, they quickly escalated their operations to drug dealing, shootings, kidnappings, and extortion. Benji started making serious money, engaging in a range of illegal activities including stealing cars and dealing in marijuana, ecstasy, steroids, and speed. Benji was also involved in car rebirthing, a process where stolen cars are given new identities. He learned about this from Dino, and together they had been involved in the scheme since they were 15 years old. They would deliver stolen cars to rebirthing garages, often collaborating with tow truck drivers to facilitate the operation. The local police in Sunshine were well acquainted with Benji, and whenever a car went missing in the area, he was usually one of the first suspects they considered. Benji quickly became a prime suspect whenever a car went missing in the area, putting him constantly on the police radar. Officers frequently visited his parents' home at all hours, but his parents always defended him. They insisted that Benji couldn't possibly be guilty and argued that the police were in the wrong. In 1996, when his boxing career hit a roadblock, Benji turned to kickboxing, a new passion that consumed him. Kickboxing provided the perfect outlet for Benji's pent-up aggression. According to kickboxing commentator Stephen Mill, Benji was known for his fearsome demeanor and readiness to take on anyone, never taking a backward step in the ring. However, in 1997, after losing a fight to Ben Serrano, Benji decided to end his kickboxing career. As the criminal world moved fast, he began to expand his operations beyond Sunshine, making connections with major players in the underworld. Benji got heavily tattooed, choosing designs that were noticeable, recognizable, and intimidating to everyone who saw them. His criminal journey took a significant turn when he formed a close connection with an underworld figure and young drug dealer named K.L. Williams. Benji and Carl developed what seemed like an unbreakable brotherly bond. Benji respected Carl and looked up to him as a mentor in the criminal world, especially as Carl was making millions dealing ecstasy and speed. Their involvement in the drug trade, however, led to escalating tensions and eventually a violent conflict with the Carton crew. Around this time, Benji realized that he needed to expand his criminal repertoire. He decided that his reputation couldn't rest solely on auto thefts and drug deals. Benji decided to move up in the criminal ranks by becoming a hitman. Even his lawyer recalls a chilling conversation where Benji was asked how things were going in his life, to which he responded, "Oh, things are going great. I've got a new job where I wear gloves." In 1999, a tragedy unfolded when 57-year-old greengrocer Joseph Quadara was ambushed and killed in a Turak car park just as he was about to start his shift at a Safeway supermarket. The police believed that this cold-blooded killing was a horrible case of mistaken identity, stemming from another man with the same name who had underworld connections. It's speculated that Benji was hired to carry out this hit, although he was never officially charged with the crime. 12 months later, in May 2000, Frank Benvenuto was found slumped forward in the driver's seat of his car. Initially, witnesses thought he was just asleep. It was only when someone checked on him that they realized he was lifeless. Frank was a major figure in Melbourne's underworld and the son of Liborio Benvenuto, who was often described in reports as the undisputed godfather of Melbourne. The reasons behind the execution were unclear, but Benji was named as one of the prime suspects in the case. Despite the suspicions, Benji was never charged for Frank Benvenuto's murder. He also found himself under suspicion for the murder of his lifelong best friend, Dino Debra. Debra was executed outside his home on Cranbrook Street in Sunshine West on October 14, 2000. Many believe that personal disputes among the Sunshine Boys over the years led to his execution. The police suspected it was a case of payback, and the Piranha Task Force publicly named Benji and another individual, Paul Kalapis, as prime suspects in the case. However, no charges were ever laid against them. 2 years later, on October 16, 2002, Paul Kalappolius met a similar fate when he was executed in his home in West Sunshine. Police suspected that Benji was responsible, possibly acting on orders from higher up in the criminal hierarchy. This suspicion was fueled by Kalappolius's aggressive debt collection methods. Being a close friend, Benji could have easily gotten close enough to Kalappolius to carry out the deed. Nevertheless, Benji was never charged. At this point, the dynamics within the Sunshine crew began to shift. These lifelong friends who had ventured into the life of crime together were possibly turning against each other. In May 2002, Melbourne's drug trade was engulfed in a violent power struggle between Carl Williams and the Carlton crew. Amid this conflict, another life was tragically lost. Victor Pierce. Pierce was killed in a hail of bullets while sitting in his car near the Coles on Bay Street in Port Melbourne, an area known for its upmarket bars, cafes, and apartments. Years later, during a court proceeding, Benji was named as the shooter. It was alleged that he had to eliminate Pierce because Pierce was reportedly planning to eliminate him. Despite the accusations and his alleged involvement in multiple high-profile crimes, the police didn't have enough evidence to charge Benji at the time. In response, they escalated their efforts by bugging his phone lines and placing him under constant surveillance. A dedicated squad tracked his every move, 24 hours a day. During this time, Melbourne's drug trade was thriving, and in December 2002, Benji decided to completely shift his allegiance to K.L. Williams. he unofficially took on the role of Williams' bodyguard. About a year later, another execution occurred. Nick Radev, nicknamed the Russian, was executed on April 15, 2003. Radev was killed as he stepped out of his black Mercedes-Benz, further intensifying the violent struggles within Melbourne's underworld. Nick Radev, known as the Russian, was reportedly lured to a meeting under the guise of confronting a speed cook. His business dealings with K.L. Williams were profitable, but he had gotten upset over the poor quality of a batch of speed produced by Carl's cook. Some sources even suggest that Radev had a habit of kidnapping cooks to coerce them into working exclusively for him. Tragically, Radev was ambushed and riddled with bullets from 2 different guns. Police believe that K.L. Williams ordered the hit, with Benji and another hitman, known simply as the Runner, allegedly pulling the triggers. However, the case around Nick Radev's murder remains unsolved. Some sources have even speculated that Radev might have been responsible for the murder of Dino Dibra, suggesting that Radev's own execution was an act of payback. Unfortunately, there's no concrete evidence to confirm these theories, and it's likely that the truth will never be fully uncovered. Radev's death was a pivotal moment, acting as the catalyst for the creation of the Piranha Task Force. This special unit had been under consideration due to the rising number of gangland slayings and was officially established just weeks after Radev's murder. During this period of increased animosity, K.L. Williams allegedly planned a $50,000 hit on Mark Mal. Mark Mal was being blamed for Radev's execution, prompting K.L. Williams to arrange a peacemaking meeting with him at Crown Casino. During their conversation, Malia confronted Williams with rumors he'd heard about Williams and Benji being behind the hit on Radev. Williams denied any involvement and offered to help Malia seek revenge against the real perpetrators. However, a witness later revealed that word had spread about Malia planning to arrange a hit on Benji and possibly Williams too. In response, Williams wanted to make sure he was prepared to act first, should it come to that. At the casino meeting, Benji reportedly accused Malia of hiring 2 men to stake out his house. Later, in a grim turn of events, Malia was lured to a garage in North Melbourne in August 2003, where he was killed. His charred body was eventually discovered in a wheelie bin in Melbourne's west. According to some sources, Benji was one of 7 people involved in this brutal act. Years later, in a significant legal development, Williams pleaded guilty to taking Mark Malia's life, along with the lives of 2 other underworld figures. By the end of 2003, Benji had achieved the notoriety he craved, but also became a figure of concern among underworld figures because of the attention he attracted. There were attempts to negotiate peace between the Carlton crew and Carl Williams, but these efforts ultimately failed, leaving Benji in a precarious position. He was now playing both sides, making it unclear where his loyalties lay. This ambiguity made him a ticking time bomb in the eyes of both his enemies and his associates. Meanwhile, Williams received 3 life sentences with a minimum non-parole period of 35 years, marking a significant moment in the ongoing saga of Melbourne's criminal underworld. On March 23, 2004, Benji went to meet Dominic G at the Lyella restaurant in Carlton. They started their conversation in the main room, but soon moved to a more private area at the back. Things heated up, leading to an argument and a violent struggle, followed by gunshots. Benji was hit. Dominic said that during the confrontation, Benji lost his temper and pulled out a weapon. But during the struggle, Dominic managed to turn the gun on Benji and fired in self-defense. Tragically, Andrew Benjamin, Benji Vainan, died at the age of 28. His funeral was held at the Greek Orthodox Church in Sunshine West, the same church where he had served as an altar boy.
In the shadowy underworld of Melbourne, there was one name that struck terror into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals. Andrew Benji Veniamin, a baby-faced altar boy turned cold-blooded killer who would become Australia's most feared gangland assassin. On March 23, 2004, at exactly 2:30 p.m., inside the La Porcella Italian restaurant in Carlton, a chilling conversation would end in gunfire. 2 shots, one to the neck, one to the eye. And with that, the reign of Australia's busiest hitman came to a violent end. But how does a devout Greek Orthodox altar boy transform into a merciless executioner responsible for at least 7 brutal murders? How does someone who once served at the sacred altar become the puppet master of death in Melbourne's blood-soaked gangland war? This is the untold story of Andrew Benji Veniamin, the most dangerous man Australia's underworld had ever seen. The making of a monster. Born on November 16, 1975, to Greek Cypriot immigrant parents Apollo and Mariana Veniamin, young Andrew grew up in the working-class suburb of Sunshine, west of Melbourne. This wasn't the breeding ground you'd expect for Australia's most notorious hitman. Every Sunday morning, little Andrew would put on his finest clothes and walk to St. Andrew's Greek Orthodox Church in Sunshine West. There, surrounded by golden icons and burning incense, he served as an altar boy, a symbol of innocence and devotion. His parents believed they were raising a good Christian boy who would follow the righteous path. But even then, there were dark seeds growing beneath the surface. As a teenager, Veniamin discovered boxing. He was small, weighing only 110 pounds, but he was driven by an obsession that bordered on madness. 5 days a week, he trained relentlessly under the guidance of legendary Olympic boxing coach Bo Gehring, who would later describe him as a whippersnapper. Gehring had high hopes for young Benji. He was talented enough to make the state team and was even slated to represent Australia at the 1994 Commonwealth Games in Canada. For a brief moment, it seemed like boxing might be his salvation, a legitimate path to channel his aggression and drive. But fate had different plans. In the early 1990s, those boxing dreams were shattered in the most mundane way possible. Veniamin and his associates decided to rob a cigarette truck. It was supposed to be easy money. Just grab the cigarettes and run. But Benji's volcanic temper emerged. He held the salesman hostage at gunpoint, turning a simple robbery into something far more sinister. When police searched his bedroom, they found all the stolen cigarettes stashed under his bed like some twisted treasure hoard. The evidence was overwhelming. At just 19 years old, Andrew Veniamin was sentenced to 3 years in the notorious Tirana Youth Detention Center. Prison changed him. When he walked out, the altar boy was gone forever. In his place stood someone far more dangerous. Someone who had learned that violence was not just effective, it was profitable. Enter the underworld. Upon his release, Veniamin didn't waste time finding his tribe. He immediately gravitated toward Dino Dabra and Paul Kalapolitis, two rising figures in Melbourne's criminal scene. Together, they formed the Sunshine Boys, a street gang that would serve as Benji's apprenticeship in the art of organized crime. But these weren't just casual friendships. These were bonds forged in blood and sealed with shared secrets. Debra and Kalapolitis became like brothers to Veniamin, or so it seemed at the time. During the day, Veniamin worked at the West Melbourne wholesale fruit and vegetable market, maintaining the facade of a legitimate life. But by night, he was building a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. He graduated from stealing cars to pushing drugs, each crime more serious than the last. His boxing background gave him a unique advantage. He understood violence in a way that others didn't. When he hit someone, it wasn't random brutality, it was calculated destruction. In 1997, Veniamin had his most notable professional fight against Ben Serrano, an event organized by the Carlton Crew, one of Melbourne's most powerful criminal organizations. It was here that the underworld first took real notice of the young fighter. He lost the fight and never boxed professionally again, but he had made the connections that would define the rest of his short, violent life. The Carlton Crew was exactly what Veniamin had been searching for without even knowing it. This wasn't just another street gang. This was organized crime at its most sophisticated level, led by figures like Alphonse Gangitano, Dominic Mick Gatto, and Graham the Munster Kinneberg. The Carlton Crew controlled significant portions of Melbourne's illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and protection rackets. For someone with Veniamin's particular skill set, it was like finding a home. The killing begins. By 2000, Andrew Veniamin had transformed from a small-time car thief into something far more terrifying, a professional killer. His first suspected murder would hit closer to home than anyone could have imagined. On October 14, 2000, his childhood friend and fellow Sunshine boy, Dino Debra, was gunned down outside his home in West Sunshine. Multiple shots to the head and chest. Clinical, professional, absolutely ruthless. Police immediately suspected that this wasn't a random killing. Detective Inspector Andrew Allen told the press, We are confident that this gunman is a hired hitman and that he, along with another person, ambushed Mr. Debra that night and shot him a number of times. This is not the only murder he has committed. That police profile fit Veniamin perfectly, but they couldn't prove it. They offered a $100,000 reward for information. No one came forward. In the underworld, silence isn't just golden, it's survival. What made this murder particularly chilling wasn't just the brutality, but the betrayal. Debra had been one of Veniamin's closest friends since childhood. They had founded the Sunshine Boys together. But in Melbourne's underworld, friendship meant nothing when money and power were involved. 2 years later, on March 22, 2001, the pattern repeated itself. George Germanos, a part-time security guard and nightclub bouncer, was found with 3 bullets in his head and 1 in his chest at an Armadale park. Germanos had been living in fear, desperately trying to borrow $5,000 to buy a handgun for protection just 2 weeks before his murder. But the gun never came. The killer found him first. Then came April 15th, 2003, a date that would cement Veniamin's reputation as Australia's most dangerous hitman. Nick the Russian Radev sat in his Mercedes-Benz Coupe on Queen Street in Coburg when death found him. 7 shots to the head and chest. The known drug dealer and standover man never saw it coming. What made this murder particularly significant was that Veniamin had met with Radev earlier that same day. He looked the man in the eye, probably shook his hand, maybe even shared a laugh, and then methodically planned his execution. Police records show that Veniamin unambiguously fit their description of the prime suspect. A red sedan was seen fleeing the scene. The shooting was professional, calculated, and utterly without mercy. By now, Victoria Police knew they were dealing with someone unprecedented in Australian criminal history. This wasn't just another gangland enforcer. This was a predator who killed with the emotional detachment of someone swatting a fly. The Williams connection. In 2002, everything changed for Andrew Veniamin when he was introduced to Carl Williams through their mutual friend Tony Mockbull. Williams was an ambitious drug trafficker who had been shot in the stomach by Jason Moran in 1999 over an $80,000 debt, an incident that sparked what would become known as the Melbourne Gangland War. Williams needed muscle. Veniamin needed work. It was a match made in hell. What began as a professional relationship quickly evolved into something much more complex and disturbing. Veniamin didn't just become Williams' bodyguard and enforcer. He became part of the family. Every Tuesday, Veniamin would arrive at the Williams household to pick up Carl's stepdaughters and take them to their religion classes. After the classes, he would bring them home, help them with their baths, and spend time playing with them. Roberta Williams, Carl's wife, would later admit that Tuesday was Veniamin's favorite day of the week. This routine painted a deeply unsettling picture. Here was a man who could shoot someone 7 times in the head on a Monday, then gently bathe children and help them with their homework on a Tuesday. The psychological compartmentalization required for such behavior suggests something far beyond normal criminal psychology. Roberta Williams would later reveal an even more chilling detail about their relationship. She admitted that Veniamin was her soulmate, and that her youngest daughter, Dakota, absolutely idolized him. The child didn't know she was adoring one of Australia's most prolific killers. But perhaps the most disturbing story of all came to light years later. Roberta Williams revealed that Veniamin had originally been hired by the Moran family to kill her and Carl. He had actually broken into their home one night, making it all the way into the roof cavity, positioned to complete the assassination. But then he heard something that stopped him cold. Roberta was in the bedroom below, singing a lullaby to baby Dakota as she rocked her to sleep. That gentle maternal sound, so pure and innocent, somehow penetrated whatever darkness lived inside Veniamin's mind. He couldn't go through with it. Instead of killing the Williams family, he joined them. The hitman became the babysitter. The assassin became the godfather figure to their children. By 2003, Andrew Veniamin had earned a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals. Dominic Mick Gatto, himself a formidable underworld figure, gave Veniamin a nickname that would haunt Melbourne's criminal community. Australia's busiest hitman. The murders were piling up, and Veniamin's name was whispered in connection with each one. After Dino Debra came Paul Kalopoulides, another of his childhood friends from the Sunshine Boys. Kallipolitis' body was found in October 2003, another calculated execution that severed yet another tie to Veneman's past. Then came Victor Pierce, a member of the notorious Pettingill criminal family. Pierce was no ordinary target. He was an experienced criminal who knew how to watch his back. But even that couldn't save him from Veniamin's methodical approach to murder. The most shocking killing was yet to come. On December 13, 2003, Graham the Munster Kinneberg was gunned down outside his home. Kinneberg wasn't just any criminal. He was a respected elder statesman of the Carlton crew, a man with decades of experience navigating the treacherous waters of organized crime. The murder of the Munster sent shockwaves through Melbourne's underworld. If someone as connected and careful as Kinneberg could be killed, then no one was safe. The old rules no longer applied. Traditional respect for criminal hierarchy meant nothing to this new breed of killer. Police intelligence suggested that Carl Williams had given his crew a chilling directive toward the end of 2003. "I want every one of them dead, and every one of their crew dead." And Andrew Veniamin was the instrument chosen to carry out this genocidal campaign against their enemies. What made Veniamin particularly terrifying wasn't just his body count, but his methods. These weren't crimes of passion or desperate acts by a cornered criminal. Each murder was carefully planned, professionally executed, and carried out with an emotional coldness that suggested a complete absence of normal human empathy. He preferred .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, a reliable weapon that wouldn't jam at a crucial moment. His approach was always the same: get close to the target, often by arranging a meeting or using an existing relationship, then strike with overwhelming violence before disappearing into the night. Former underworld figures who knew Veniamin during this period described him as having entered what his getaway driver, Farouk Orman, called his crazy time. The careful, calculating killer was becoming increasingly unpredictable and dangerous, even to his own associates. By day, he was Uncle Benji, the beloved family friend who helped children with their homework. By night, he was the angel of death, systematically eliminating anyone who stood in Carl Williams' way. The final confrontation. By early 2004, the walls were closing in around Andrew Veniamin. The Melbourne underworld was awash with rumors and speculation about who was responsible for the mounting body count. His name was being whispered in connection with nearly every major killing in the Gangland War. Dominic Mick Gatto, a powerful figure in the Carlton crew, was particularly concerned about the murder of his close friend Graham the Munster Kinneberg. Street talk suggested that Veniamin had pulled the trigger, although phone records placed him on the other side of the Melbourne at the time of the killing. Gatto began conducting his own investigation, holding a series of meetings with members of the Williams crew. One of these confrontations was even captured on CCTV cameras at Crown Casino, showing the tension that was building between the warring factions. On March 23, 2004, Veniamin called Gatto and arranged to meet at La Porcella, an Italian restaurant in Carlton. It was supposed to be a private conversation to clear the air about the Kinneberg murder. Instead, it would become the scene of Veniamin's final act of violence. Gatto arrived at the restaurant around 2 p.m. and was sitting with associate Steve, the Turk Kaya, when Veniamin walked in. Contemporary witnesses described his appearance: a baseball cap, t-shirt, cargo pants, and thongs. But beneath that ordinary exterior, Andrew Veniamin was carrying his signature point, .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. Gatto invited Veniamin to join him for what appeared to be a friendly conversation. After a few minutes, Gatto suggested they move to a more private area behind the kitchen, where they could talk without being overheard. It was there, in that quiet corridor away from witnesses, that Andrew Veniamin made his final mistake: death in La Porcella. What happened in those final moments in the back corridor of La Porcella restaurant has been reconstructed through court testimony, but the full truth died with Andrew Veniamin at 2:30 p.m. on March 23, 2004. According to Mick Gatto's testimony, the conversation started calmly. Gatto told Veniamin that he'd rather he not come around near because of the suspicions surrounding the Kinneberg murder. It was then that Veniamin's legendary temper finally exploded. "I was looking at him in the eyes, and his face went all funny, and he sort of stepped back," Gatto testified. Then came the words that sealed Veniamin's fate. "We had to kill fucking Graham. Fuck him and fuck you." In that moment of rage, Veniamin had just confessed to murdering Graham Kinneberg, but he wasn't finished. According to Gatto, Veniamin also implicated himself in the murders of Dino Dibra and Paul Kallipolitis, his childhood friends from the Sunshine Boys. The confession seemed to release something in Veniamin. The careful, calculating killer was gone, replaced by a man consumed with rage and bloodlust. "He pulled a gun out, and that's when I lunged at him," Gatto testified. "I grabbed his arm, and the gun went off past my head. I actually thought the round hit me." The two former boxers struggled for control of the weapon. Both men understood violence, but Gatto had size and desperation on his side. During the struggle, he managed to turn the gun around. 2 shots rang out in the confined space. The first bullet struck Veniamin in the neck. The second found its mark in his eye. Gatto later described the scene. Veniamin was lying on his back, spluttering and coughing blood. The man who had terrorized Melbourne's underworld for years was dying on the floor of an Italian restaurant, his blood mixing with the sawdust. Gatto retreated to the main dining area with a ringing ear and handed the .38 Smith & Wesson to the restaurant owner, who wrapped it in a paper towel for police to collect. When authorities arrived, they found Andrew Benji Veniamin dead at age 28. Outside, his silver Mercedes remained double-parked, engine still running, as if he had expected to walk out alive. The most feared hitman in Australian history had been killed by one of his intended victims. Legacy of terror. The death of Andrew Veniamin sent shockwaves through both the underworld and law enforcement communities. At just 28 years old, he had become one of the most prolific killers in Australian criminal history, suspected of at least 7 murders and connected to many more. Victoria police had never managed to bring a single murder charge against him, despite years of investigation and intelligence linking him to multiple killings. He had operated with such careful planning and ruthless efficiency that evidence remained consistently out of reach. Detective Superintendent Andrew Allen, who headed the Piranha Task Force investigating the gangland killings, acknowledged the impact of Veniamin's death. "We actually broke the code of silence in the underworld, something that has never been achieved before." The Melbourne Gangland War continued for several more years, ultimately claiming 36 lives between 1998 and 2010. But many investigators believe that Veniamin's death marked a turning point, the moment when the violence began to spiral out of control as territorial disputes erupted, without his methodical, professional approach to elimination. His funeral was held at the same saint, Andrew's Greek Orthodox Church in Sunshine West, where he had served as an altar boy. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The sacred space where young Andrew had once represented innocence and devotion now hosted the final farewell for one of Australia's most notorious killers. Carl Williams himself served as a pallbearer, helping to carry the casket of the man who had served as both his protector and his weapon of war. The image of Williams supporting the weight of his dead assassin became one of the most haunting photographs of the entire gangland era. Roberta Williams later revealed that she held vigil over Veniamin's body after his death, a final act of loyalty to the man she had called her soulmate. The complexity of their relationship, part family friend, part professional killer, exemplified the twisted bonds that held Melbourne's criminal underworld together. When Dominic Gatto stood trial for Veniamin's murder, he was acquitted on grounds of self-defense. The jury accepted that he had acted to save his own life when confronted by Australia's most dangerous hitman. Justice had been served, but it was the rough justice of the streets rather than the courtroom. Andrew Benji Veniamin's story became the subject of intense media fascination, inspiring books, documentaries, and the hit television series Underbelly, where he was portrayed by actor Damien Walshy Howling. But no dramatic recreation could capture the full horror of his transformation from altar boy to angel of death. In the end, Andrew Veniamin represented something uniquely terrifying in Australian criminal history. Amid the shadowy alleys of Sydney's criminal underbelly, one name evokes dread even among the toughest gangsters: the Ahmed crime family. Renowned for their brutal methods and unyielding dominion, this infamous syndicate has carved a path of devastation across the city. Crimes such as extortion, drug trafficking, and cold-blooded murder define their toxic legacy. But what unfolds when the underworld cannibalizes itself? With the Ahmeds now targeted by their own adversaries, the stakes escalate to spine-chilling levels. As alliances fracture and loyalties falter, Sydney watches in suspense, eager to see who will outlast in this lethal cat-and-mouse pursuit. In the shadowy underbelly of Sydney's gangland, three brothers command a formidable presence: Wally, Brownie, and Rock Ahmed. Wally, the eldest, is a name spoken in hushed tones by those aware of his dark machinations. With a rap sheet that stretches beyond the imagination, his charges range from extortion to manslaughter. Wally's notoriety peaked with his involvement in the high-profile shooting of Maez Danny, a famous club owner in Sydney. This chilling event sent shockwaves through the city's criminal underworld, but we'll delve into that more later. While Wally is the experienced hand, Brownie is the volatile wildcard, earning his nickname for his ruthless nature, not a charming disposition. Brownie's criminal record is a litany of violent offenses, including multiple shootings. His insatiable thirst for power makes him a force to be reckoned with in the seedy backstreets of the underworld. Then there's Rock, the youngest. He seems to evade law enforcement's radar, but don't be fooled by his low profile. Rock has his hands in numerous illicit pies. Though his rap sheet might not be as extensive, his involvement in drug trafficking and other nefarious activities is well known among those who lurk in the shadows. Their criminal operations are as diverse as they are audacious. Extortion is their bread and butter, squeezing every last ounce from those daring to defy them. Drug running is another lucrative enterprise, with the Ahmed brothers managing vast distribution networks across Sydney. And then there are the murders, chilling, calculated, and ruthlessly executed. This brings us back to the murder of Maez Danny. When he discovered that his 18-year-old nephew's jaw had been broken by a doorman outside a nightclub on Oxford Street in June 2002, it ignited a deadly conflict. Less than 48 hours later, Maez Danny, 39, of Granville, lay dead with 4 bullets in his chest outside a car wrecker's yard. On June 11th, the alleged killer was identified as Wally Ahmed, 37, of Condell Park, who was both a nightclub bouncer and the yard's proprietor. He had allegedly assaulted Danny's nephew, Khaled Hamoud, outside the DCM nightclub in the early hours of June 9th after denying him entry. What followed was a deadly altercation between Danny and Wally that ended with Danny being shot 4 to 5 times. The Ahmed brothers had more than 55 open cases against them, and those who dared to cross them often paid the ultimate price. Many lives were snuffed out in a hail of bullets, their bodies left to decay in shallow graves. Despite their penchant for violence, the Ahmed family preferred operating under the radar. They conducted their dark business away from prying eyes and nosy law enforcement agencies. Yet, even the most cautious criminals couldn't completely evade the watchful gaze of the police. The Ahmed brothers were under constant scrutiny, with law enforcement compiling dossier after dossier of their illicit activities. The first significant sting operation unfolded on a balmy summer evening as the sun set and the city buzzed with nightlife. Acting on a tip-off from an informant, police raided a warehouse suspected of being a hub for the Ahmed's drug trafficking operations. In a daring raid, officers seized large quantities of cocaine, meth, and heroin, along with cash and weapons. Yet somehow, the brothers managed to slip through the cracks of the justice system time and again. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The Ahmed brothers' reign of terror would soon crumble. For now, they continued to operate in the shadows, their presence casting an ominous cloak over Sydney's criminal underworld. In the heart of Sydney's gangland, tension simmered below the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. And erupt they did on that fateful day when Mansa El-Husseini made a brazen attempt on the Ahmed family's lives. But who is El-Husseini, you might ask? At just 28 years old, he had already carved out a reputation as a significant player in an interstate drug trafficking syndicate stretching from Sydney to Melbourne. With connections to the notorious prisoner Bassem Hamzi, believed to be the mastermind behind the operation, El-Husseini was well versed in the world of crime. He faced 15 charges linked to the syndicate, including supplying a commercial quantity of prohibited drugs and participating in a criminal group, catapulting him into law enforcement's crosshairs. Despite his attempts to stay under the radar, El Husseini eventually surrendered to authorities, accompanied by his solicitor. His surrender marked a pivotal moment in the ongoing investigation, shedding light on the inner workings of the drug ring. However, for El Husseini, the future looked bleak. Denied bail and facing numerous charges, his fate was left hanging as he awaited his day in court. Surprisingly, he was released from jail much sooner than anticipated, within just 2 years. Many would expect a fresh start after such an ordeal, but not El Husseini. Known for his complex character and deep ties to the criminal underground, his ambition remained undeterred. Upon release, he set his sights on the Ahmed brothers after receiving a call to arms from an associate in jail who informed him of an ongoing feud. Armed and clad in bulletproof vests, he stormed a gathering at the Ahmed family home, ready to unleash chaos. But fate had other plans. As chaos erupted, shots rang out, filling the night with the clamor of gunfire and the screams of terrified onlookers. When the smoke cleared, it was El Husseini who lay critically wounded, his plan in shambles. He staggered to a nearby hospital and eventually succumbed to his injuries, instigating a chain of retaliations that reverberated throughout Sydney's gangland for years to come. Enraged by the audacity of El Husseini's attack, the Ahmed family swiftly sought vengeance. Retaliation was brutal and unrelenting. Bullets flew, bodies fell, and drive-by shootings became routine as rival factions engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Amidst the bloodshed, one thing was clear: violence was endemic in Sydney's gangland. For the Ahmed family, the El Husseini incident was merely the beginning of a prolonged and bloody conflict. As the body count rose and streets ran red with blood, it became evident that peace was an elusive dream in Sydney's unforgiving criminal landscape. Then, on September 11, 2005, Brownie was charged with shooting Monza El Husseini in the hand and shoulder. Police discovered a crashed car in Condole Park after El Husseini's aunt's home was sprayed with 32 bullets. However, the police failed to charge Brownie officially, a grave mistake, as the Ahmed brothers were far from backing down. It was here that Safwan Chahi and Wally Ahmed collided, sparking a feud with monumental repercussions for both the Ahmed family and Sydney's broader criminal landscape. Safwan Chahi, deeply entrenched in the underworld, found himself at odds with Wally Ahmed, the patriarch of the notorious Ahmed crime family. Their conflict revolved around debts and loyalty, two invaluable currencies in the ruthless realm of organized crime. As tensions escalated, Safwan Chahi agreed to a meeting at Wally's car wrecking yard, hidden within the industrial maze of Condole Park. What followed became a brutal chapter in Sydney's criminal history. In a storm of violence and gunfire, Safwan Chahi met a tragic end at the hands of Wally Ahmed's loyalists. Bullets tore through the night, rending flesh and bone as the feud between the factions reached its zenith. But this deadly conflict came at a steep price for the Ahmed family. In the bustling corridors of Bankstown's central shopping center, amid the everyday chaos of shoppers and vendors, a sinister plot unfolded, sealing the fate of one of Sydney's most infamous crime lords, Wally Ahmed. On what seemed like an ordinary April day in 2016, Wally sat outside a cafe, possibly seeking solace or simply going about his business. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of impending danger. Unbeknownst to him, a masked figure lurked in the shadows, armed with lethal intent. With swift and calculated precision, the gunman closed in, his footsteps masked by the bustling sounds of the crowded mall. In an instant, the serenity of the afternoon shattered with the deafening roar of gunfire. 7 shots rang out, each one striking Wally with deadly accuracy, tearing through his chest and leaving chaos in their wake. Shoppers scattered, their terrified screams echoing off the walls of Bankstown Central. The assassin swiftly retreated, vanishing into the panicked crowd before anyone could identify him. As sirens wailed and the dust settled, Wally Ahmed took his final breath, a victim of the very violence he had often wielded. As police delved into the case, unsettling details emerged. A review of CCTV footage from in and around the shopping center suggested that the murder might have been planned for a day earlier. Video footage showed a luxury vehicle driving into the car park close to Ahmed, who had just finished a gym session. At that time, Wally was spotted near the neighboring Havana Cafe, and uniformed police officers were seen walking past him. Investigators believe the presence of those officers and a marked police car in the car park spooked Wally's would-be attackers. CCTV caught the car speeding away without a shot being fired. Then, 24 hours later, a lone gunman approached Wally as he sat at the same cafe and fired multiple shots, killing the 40-year-old gang leader. To throw the police off their trail, the gunman and his accomplices switched getaway vehicles up to 3 times. They abandoned the initial getaway car, a white Mercedes, which was found torched in Greenacre, before switching to a second vehicle. It is believed that they then planned to switch to a third car, with another driver behind the wheel, and torched the second vehicle. The violence didn't end there. A suspect in Wally's shooting, crime figure Hamad Assad, was shot dead in the driveway of his George's Hall home 6 months later. Anyone might have thought this would be the end, but the bloodshed continued. 5 months after that, a suspect in Assad's shooting, Hells Angels figure and Ahmad family associate Kamal Blackie Barakat, was murdered in his Mortlake unit. The cycle of violence seemed relentless, perpetuating a long and bloody saga in Sydney's gangland, where peace was but a fleeting illusion. Many believe Ahmed A.J. Jabir orchestrated the killings, yet his gang affiliations remained a mystery. Following the deaths of 2 key suspects in these underworld slayings, police initiated investigations under the banner of Strike Force Osprey. While each murder was scrutinized individually, relevant information was shared across teams, ensuring no stone was left unturned. Homicide Squad Commander Detective Jason Dickinson spearheaded the efforts. However, over time, the trail grew cold. Despite Wally's life slipping away, his legacy continued to cast a long, ominous shadow over Sydney's criminal circles. For his brother Brownie Ahmed, Wally's death was a catastrophe, sparking a desperate bid for survival. With law enforcement closing in and the specter of justice looming large, Brownie made a daring move to flee the country and seek refuge in Lebanon. The escape was fraught with peril and uncertainty, but for Brownie, it was the only way out. He spent months in hiding, a fugitive from justice, haunted by his past and his brother's violent end. Even in the far-flung corners of the globe, Lebanon predominantly, the unyielding grasp of the law eventually caught up with him. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but was released within a year and a half. As Wally and Brownie faced the repercussions of their choices, it was now Rock Ahmed's turn to step up. With his brothers either dead or incapacitated, Rock found himself thrust into a position of unexpected responsibility, navigating the perilous waters of Sydney's criminal underworld on his own. With Wally's $7.7 million debt looming large and the family's criminal empire in turmoil, Rock made a fateful decision to shoulder his brother's burdens and expand their illicit operations into new, perilous territories. Driven by a heavy heart and steely resolve, Rock plunged into the treacherous world of drug importation. This path was fraught with danger, but for Rock, it was a necessary gamble to keep the Ahmed family afloat in the hostile waters of Sydney's criminal underworld. Unbeknownst to Rock, law enforcement agencies had been meticulously gathering evidence against him, silently biding their time for the perfect moment to strike. Under the guise of a covert undercover operation, police officers infiltrated Rock's inner circle, amassing intelligence and building a robust case against him. As Rock's ambitions grew, so did the net of surveillance, tightening with each passing day. When the moment was right, law enforcement pounced, arresting Rock and his accomplices in a coordinated raid that sent shockwaves through the criminal community. The evidence against Rock was damning, a trail of paper and digital breadcrumbs leading straight to his doorstep. From intercepted communications to clandestine meetings, the prosecution presented a compelling case that left little doubt about Rock's guilt. In the cold confines of the courtroom, he faced the full weight of justice. His fate hanging in the balance, the prosecution laid bare his crimes for all to see. When the gavel finally fell, it marked a sobering moment of reckoning. Rock Ahmed was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 8 years and 9 months. For Rock, it was the end of an era, a swift and decisive downfall that terminated his reign in Sydney's criminal underworld. For law enforcement, it was a triumph of justice, a victory achieved through patience, perseverance, and unwavering determination. Yet, the Ahmed family saga didn't conclude there. While Rock languished behind the cold, gray walls of the prison, where most would see confinement, Brownie Ahmed saw an opportunity. Upon his release from jail, Brownie Ahmed resurfaced, wielding power and influence that extended far beyond prison walls. With a calculating mind and ruthless determination, he employed intimidation and extortion to maintain his grip on the criminal underworld. Through an extensive network of associates, both inside and outside of prison, Brownie orchestrated a myriad of criminal activities ranging from drug trafficking to extortion schemes, amassing over $10 million. No one was safe from his reach. He manipulated those around him with a deadly mix of connections and influence. It wasn't just his criminal enterprises that instilled fear in his enemies. Brownie's penchant for violence had no bounds. He conducted brutal attacks on rival gangs and even fellow inmates. Through bribery, coercion, and sheer force of will, he operated with impunity, casting a long shadow over Sydney's criminal landscape. Upon his release, it was clear that prison had not changed Brownie one bit. In the quiet suburb of Greenacre, amidst the mundane rhythms of everyday life, a dark and sinister plot was set into motion, a plot that would culminate in the brazen execution of one of Sydney's most notorious criminals, Brownie Ahmed. It was a meticulously planned hit, executed with chilling precision by those seeking revenge for Brownie's long list of sins. As he stepped out of a friend's house on that fateful day, he unknowingly walked into a carefully laid trap, his fate sealed by the hands of his enemies. Like a stealthy predator stalking its prey, the gunman emerged from the shadows, weapon poised. In an instant, the calm of the suburban street shattered with the deafening roar of gunfire. Bullets tore through the air with deadly accuracy, and Brownie's survival hung by a thread. But the assassin showed no mercy, unleashing a relentless barrage that left Brownie lifeless on the pavement, his blood staining the concrete beneath him. As the dust settled on the bloody demise of the Ahmed family, Sydney's criminal underworld teetered on the edge of chaos. Brownie Ahmed's death ignited a powder keg of violence and retribution. In the ensuing weeks and months, a wave of shootings and murders swept through the city, all sparked by the power vacuum left by the Ahmed family's downfall. Rival factions clashed in a desperate bid for dominance, leaving no corner of Sydney untouched by the tide of bloodshed. This is the story of the Ahmed brothers, who once ruled the streets of Sydney with fear, and ultimately became victims of the very violence they propagated. What are your thoughts on this tale? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to check out our channel for more gripping stories from the underworld. See you in the next one.
In 1985, a notorious hitman walked out of his Sydney apartment, got into a police car, and vanished without a trace. His name was Chris Flannery, and he charged $50,000 per kill. This was the beginning of Australia's most mysterious cold case. What happened in those final moments? The official story claims he simply disappeared, but witness accounts tell a different tale. One that involves corrupt police officers, organized crime bosses, and a web of silence that has lasted nearly 4 decades. Brunswick, 1948. A small boy stands in the doorway of a weatherboard house, watching his father stumble down the street one last time. Chris Flannery would never see his alcoholic father again, leaving his mother to work multiple jobs in Melbourne's roughest neighborhood just to keep food on the table. This moment marked the beginning of his tragic transformation. The neighborhood was a breeding ground for violence and crime, where local gangs ruled the corners. Chris quickly gained a reputation as the kid who wouldn't back down, no matter how big his opponent. By 12, he was running with older boys, participating in petty theft and street fights. His mother's pleas fell on deaf ears as he chased quick money and street respect. At 14, Flannery crossed a line that would change his life forever. His first criminal conviction came after a brutal assault on a local shopkeeper who'd accused him of stealing. Instead of showing remorse, Chris smiled throughout his court appearance. The judge, troubled by his behavior, sentenced him to Morningstar Reformatory School. Morningstar would transform this troubled teen into something far more dangerous. Behind its stone walls, guards employed systematic torture under the guise of discipline. Flannery became their primary target, his defiant attitude drawing special attention. In response, he orchestrated an act of rebellion that became legendary, convincing an older inmate to tattoo a massive crucifix across his back. The crude ink job was excruciating, but it served its purpose. The guards couldn't strike him there anymore without damaging their handiwork. Each punishment only hardened his resolve. While other boys crumbled, Flannery emerged stronger, organizing other inmates and manipulating the system to his advantage. The reform school's attempts to rehabilitate him backfired spectacularly. By 19, his escalating violent behavior landed him in Melbourne's notorious Pentridge prison. As he walked through those gates, the guards whispered warnings about the new arrival, but they didn't realize that their warnings were too late. Morningstar had already done its work. The scared young boy who'd watched his father walk away was long gone. In his place stood a young man who'd learned that violence was the only language the world understood. As he was processed into Pentridge's intake unit, a prison psychologist noted his disturbing lack of empathy and potential for extreme violence. Behind those bluestone walls, in the infamous H Division, Chris Flannery was about to receive an education in brutality that would transform him into Australia's most feared hitman. Those bluestone walls held secrets darker than anyone could imagine. Inside H Division, guards wielded absolute power, turning daily life into an endless cycle of physical and psychological torture. When they encountered Chris Flannery's defiant attitude, they saw it as a personal challenge they needed to crush. Inside this concrete fortress, new arrivals faced brutal beating sessions that could last for hours. The guards operated without oversight or restraint, making every day a fresh torment for the inmates. But Flannery refused to submit to their authority. In a shocking act of rebellion, he stripped completely naked and covered himself in his own waste, making it impossible for the guards to handle him. When that didn't stop the beatings, he launched a hunger strike that lasted 28 days. His deteriorating condition and the publicity it generated forced authorities to launch a parliamentary inquiry into conditions within H Division. His brother, Michael Flannery, a respected Melbourne lawyer, helped expose these abuses. He testified about the systematic torture, the arbitrary punishments, and the culture of violence that permeated every corner of the facility. The inquiry revealed horrifying details: inmates being forced to run gauntlets of baton-wielding guards, random midnight beatings, and psychological warfare designed to break even the strongest spirits. But rather than breaking under the pressure, Flannery was studying. Every punch thrown by a guard, every psychological tactic they employed, he absorbed it all. Prison psychologists noted with growing alarm his exceptional ability to compartmentalize violence and his complete absence of normal emotional responses. One report warned that he was developing advanced sociopathic tendencies that could make him extremely dangerous if released. The guards became his unwitting teachers in the art of brutality. They showed him how to inflict maximum pain with minimum effort, how to use fear as a weapon, and how to break someone's spirit through calculated violence. These lessons in brutality would later make him Australia's most feared hitman. As the parliamentary inquiry dragged on, conditions in H Division barely improved. Flannery spent 3 years in this concrete hell, emerging in 1972 as something entirely new. The young criminal who entered Pentridge was gone. In his place stood a man who had mastered the very techniques of brutality that were meant to subdue him. The system had tried to break Chris Flannery. Instead, they created something far more dangerous. As he walked out of Pentridge's gates, he carried with him the scars of his imprisonment and a deadly education in violence that would soon terrorize Australia's criminal underworld. The guards had transformed him, just not as they'd intended. freedom exposed Flannery's stark limitations as a criminal in Australia's underworld. Despite his prison education, he proved remarkably inept at armed robbery, with each attempt ending in humiliating failure. These disasters would eventually drive him toward a far more sinister path that would terrorize the entire country. His robbery attempts read like a comedy of errors. Once, he tripped over his own feet during an escape, scattering stolen money in front of witnesses. In Perth, his getaway car ran out of fuel just blocks from the bank he'd robbed. Each failure only fueled his determination to succeed in crime. Seeking stability, Flannery briefly worked at an upscale men's clothing store in Melbourne. There, he developed his signature taste for Italian designer suits and expensive cologne. But after 2 months, he returned to crime, robbing the same store that employed him. He even paused during the robbery to try on a jacket, as his former boss would later tell police. The defining moment came at Sydney's Central Station. Detective Roger Rogerson and his team had been monitoring Flannery after his string of failed robberies across New South Wales. When Flannery spotted the surveillance team during morning rush hour, he drew his weapon, transforming the busy station into chaos. Trapped between platforms 18 and 19, Flannery unleashed a level of violence that previewed his future notoriety. He charged at the police officers, firing indiscriminately with complete disregard for his safety. It took 6 officers to subdue him, and even then, he fought with such intensity that several needed medical attention. During the arrest, Flannery displayed a shocking savagery that rattled even veteran officers. He seemed to embrace the violence, laughing as police struggled to contain him. One detective called it the most savage resistance arrest in his 20-year career. Back in prison, Flannery made a decision that would alter Australia's criminal landscape forever. In a prison yard conversation with fellow inmate Alan Williams, he announced his new career plan. "I'm done with this amateur stuff. From now on, I'm going to kill people for a living." Williams thought it was a joke until he saw Flannery's cold, determined expression. That conversation marked the emergence of Mr. Rent-A-Kill, Australia's first professional hitman for hire. Flannery had discovered his true criminal calling. The failed robber was about to become the most feared assassin in the country's history. While Melbourne's criminal underworld was filled with tough guys and empty threats, Flannery distinguished himself with a revolutionary business approach, a professional contract killing service with a strict fixed rate payable in advance. After years of failed robberies, he had found his true calling in methodical, calculating murder. His reputation spread quickly through criminal networks as someone who delivered results with cold efficiency. His transformation from bungling thief to feared hitman was cemented with the contract on Melbourne solicitor Roger Wilson. Wilson had made dangerous enemies through his work with police informants, and his elimination would showcase Flannery's trademark precision. Dressed in a police uniform, Flannery approached Wilson outside his suburban home, claiming he needed to discuss a case. The solicitor, accustomed to working with law enforcement, willingly entered the vehicle. By the time Wilson realized his fatal mistake, they were deep in the woods outside Melbourne. What followed demonstrated Flannery's calculated methodology. He systematically wore his target down before executing him with 2 precise shots. The body was buried in the forest, but increasing police activity forced Flannery to relocate it to a site that remains undiscovered despite extensive searches. Wilson's disappearance triggered a major investigation, but potential witnesses had an unsettling habit of vanishing before they could testify. The Wilson murder established Flannery as Melbourne's premier contract killer. Unlike his earlier chaotic robbery attempts, this new profession perfectly suited his methodical nature and prison-hardened instincts. Each successful hit enhanced his reputation, and Melbourne's underworld elite soon recognized that the former failed criminal had found his true expertise: precise, professional elimination. Chris Flannery's home life reveals a man living in perfect balance between two extreme worlds. In their suburban home, he transformed into a devoted family man, pushing his adopted child on playground swings and never missing family dinner, even after the deadliest assignments. His marriage to Kathleen Egan in April 1978 marked an unexpected turning point. Fresh out of prison and already establishing himself as Australia's deadliest hitman, Flannery showed genuine dedication to his new family by adopting Kathleen's child from a previous relationship. Those who knew them witnessed his authentic commitment to domestic life. The feared hitman who made hardened criminals tremble had only one person who could strike fear into his own heart: his wife, Kathleen. "I've got to get home or she'll have my nuts," he'd tell associates when meetings ran late, betraying a mixture of respect and genuine fear for his wife's authority. Between violent assignments, Flannery immersed himself completely in family life, taking elaborate vacations that could stretch for weeks. He'd spend his days playing with his child and attending to domestic duties as if his darker profession didn't exist. But the police surveillance teams documenting his movements knew the truth, watching his seamless transitions between family man and executioner. Their relationship carried an intensity that fascinated observers. Kathleen proved far more than a passive witness to her husband's criminal career. She asked detailed questions about his activities and exercised considerable influence over his decisions. Police eventually suspected she played a significant role in coordinating his criminal enterprises. The surveillance team stationed outside their home witnessed his daily transformations. In the morning, he'd kiss his family goodbye like any suburban father. Hours later, he'd carry out a contract with cold precision. Then he'd return home, change clothes, and help with homework as if nothing had happened. Flannery mastered the art of compartmentalization between his roles as family man and contract killer. He applied the same meticulous attention whether planning an assassination or organizing a family birthday party. At the center stood Kathleen, the only person who truly understood both sides of Australia's most feared hitman, sharing a story that merged domestic devotion with criminal enterprise. Behind the carefully maintained facade of family man lay a predator who could switch from sharing tea with his targets to executing them in cold blood. The Basham murders would become one of the most shocking examples of his ruthless nature. August 13, 1982, started like any other day in suburban Sydney. Drug dealer Terence Basham and his partner Susan Smith welcomed Flannery into their home, completely unaware of his true intentions. He sat calmly with his victims, engaging in pleasant conversation over tea while knowing exactly how their afternoon would end. Without warning, Flannery drew his weapon and executed both Basham and Smith at point-blank range. The clinical precision of the killing showed his evolution into a professional assassin, but his most cruel act was leaving their 2-year-old daughter Sarah alone with her parents' bodies. The next morning, police discovered Sarah hugging the lifeless bodies of her parents, having spent the night alone with their corpses. This image of innocence destroyed by calculated violence would haunt investigators for years to come. The Basham residence had been known for drug activity, but the cold-blooded nature of these murders stood apart. Forensic reports confirmed both victims were shot at close range in what appeared to be carefully planned executions. In the aftermath, Flannery showed no remorse. He began openly bragging about his violent acts, using the Basham murders to build his fearsome reputation in Sydney's criminal underworld. Each retelling seemed to give him pleasure, especially the details others found most disturbing. The Basham murders marked a turning point for Flannery. He embraced a new level of brutality that made him even more valuable to Sydney's criminal elite. As his reputation for ruthless efficiency grew, so did the price for his services, along with the list of potential clients willing to pay for his particular skills. Imagine a city where hitmen advertise their services like businessmen, where murder has a price tag, and where loyalty changes hands with each new contract. Welcome to 1980s Sydney, where Chris Flannery was about to make his mark as Australia's most notorious gun for hire. The city's underworld was already a powder keg of competing interests and violent turf wars. Different criminal factions fought ruthlessly for control of Sydney's lucrative rackets, from illegal gambling to vice operations. Into this volatile mix stepped Flannery, ready to capitalize on the chaos. He positioned himself as a freelance operator, taking contracts from any crime group willing to meet his price. This unusual business model made him both valuable and dangerous. A gun for hire with no true loyalties. His growing cocaine habit began to shape his actions in dangerous ways. Flannery openly bragged about his murders in underworld hangouts, treating each death like another item on his resume. This reckless behavior marked him as different from the old-school criminals who preferred to operate in shadows. His disregard for traditional criminal hierarchies and police authority reached new heights when he reportedly told a high-ranking police officer, "You're not an endangered species." The threat was clear. In Flannery's world, everyone was a potential target if the price was right. This attitude earned him fear and respect in equal measure, but it also made him increasingly unpredictable. The cocaine-fueled paranoia began affecting his judgment. Where once he'd been calculating and methodical, he now took unnecessary risks. He'd switch allegiances on a whim, working for rival gangs sometimes within the same week. In Sydney's underworld, where loyalty was currency, Flannery's mercenary approach marked him as a wild card that no one could fully trust. As gang wars erupted across Sydney, Flannery found himself in constant demand. Each faction wanted the feared Mr. Rent-a-Kill on their side, but none could be sure he wouldn't work for their enemies tomorrow. He'd become a deadly free agent in a city where taking sides was traditionally how criminals survived. This unusual position made him valuable, but also increasingly isolated. By 1985, both corrupt police and rival gangsters were beginning to see Flannery as a major liability. His cocaine-addled boasting and erratic behavior threatened the delicate balance of power in Sydney's criminal ecosystem. The once disciplined hitman who transformed murder into a business was spiraling into dangerous territory, seemingly blind to the consequences of his actions. Flannery's cocaine-fueled spiral had already made him dangerous, but his next move would shock even Sydney's most hardened criminals. When Detective Michael Drury refused a bribe, Flannery unleashed a violence that would destroy the delicate balance between law and crime. Detective Drury had been investigating a drug case that threatened to expose connections between corrupt police and Sydney's criminal underground. The syndicate, following their usual playbook, sent corrupt officer Roger Rogerson to offer Drury a bribe. But Drury stood firm, refusing the money and setting off a chain of events that would change everything. The syndicate saw Drury's refusal as a direct threat to their operation. They needed someone to handle the situation, and Chris Flannery stepped forward with a solution that would prove catastrophic for everyone involved. On June 6, 1984, as Detective Drury prepared dinner in his kitchen with his 2-year-old daughter nearby, gunshots shattered his kitchen window. The bullet struck Drury, but he survived and identified Flannery as the shooter. This attack on a police officer violated an unspoken rule that even the most ruthless criminals respected. The shooting created a seismic shift in Sydney's underworld. While corruption and bribery were business as usual, attempting to murder a police officer threatened the very system that allowed organized crime to operate. Both law enforcement and criminals recoiled at this breach of their unwritten code. His connection to the shooting through Roger Rogerson exposed the corruption within the police force. When Rogerson was later dismissed for misconduct, Flannery lost his protective shield within law enforcement. Flannery's position became increasingly precarious. To corrupt police officers, he represented a dangerous loose end who knew too much. To the criminal underworld, he was now a liability who had broken their most sacred rule. His paranoid behavior only amplified the danger he posed to both sides. The failed assassination of Detective Drury marked Flannery's point of no return. He had transformed from a valuable asset into a threat that neither criminals nor corrupt police could afford to ignore. His erratic behavior and intimate knowledge of both worlds' secrets sealed his fate in Sydney's underworld. Just months after shooting Detective Drury, Flannery faced a terrifying machine gun attack on his home that would send him spiraling into madness. That January morning, bullets tore through his walls, and though he escaped with his life, his grip on reality began to slip away. The attack pushed him deeper into cocaine addiction, with Flannery consuming the drug up to 20 times daily while battling severe sleep deprivation. Police surveillance teams watched as Australia's most methodical hitman unraveled before their eyes. Flannery stayed awake for weeks at a time, his appearance deteriorating as he bounced between safe houses. The deadly mix of cocaine and exhaustion twisted his mind, convincing him that corrupt police and rival gangsters were closing in from all sides. His fears weren't completely imaginary. As Sydney's premier hitman, Flannery carried dangerous secrets about the criminal underworld and its connections to law enforcement. He made it clear, if anyone tried to take him out, he'd expose everything he knew about the bodies buried across Sydney, both literally and figuratively. In his cocaine-fueled paranoia, Flannery began writing lists of targets, former allies, police officers, and criminal associates he believed were plotting against him. His behavior grew more erratic by the day. Surveillance teams observed him taking random detours, studying reflections, and constantly checking for followers. The criminal underworld watched with alarm as their once reliable killer transformed into an unpredictable threat. His detailed knowledge of corrupt police operations and organized crime made him too dangerous to ignore. Every day brought new signs that Flannery was losing his grip, and by May 1985, both criminals and law enforcement had reached the same conclusion. The man who knew too much had to be silenced. Sydney's most professional hitman had become a target himself. In the underworld, an unstable man armed with explosive secrets can only survive for so long. As Flannery's paranoia reached its peak, the hunter was about to become the hunted. As Flannery's grip on sanity weakened, his body count kept rising. The turning point came with his most shocking murder yet, the assassination of someone who had completely trusted him. This final contract would reveal just how far Flannery had fallen into his deadly spiral. On April the 23rd, 1985, Tony Spaghetti Eustace walked out of the airport Hilton in North Arncliffe. 6 bullets tore through his back as he approached his gold Mercedes, a brutal execution of someone Flannery once called friend. 2 schoolchildren discovered Eustace bleeding beside his car, marking another chilling chapter in Sydney's underworld violence. The murder of Eustace sent tremors through Sydney's criminal circles. Flannery had eliminated his closest associate in the Sydney underworld, sending an unmistakable message that shattered what remained of the underground's trust in their most effective killer. Police files attributed at least 15 murders to Flannery, though investigators suspected many more. His deadly efficiency had served Sydney's criminal elite well until now. The same skills that made him valuable had become a liability as his behavior grew more erratic. After killing Eustace, Flannery began threatening to expose everyone's secrets if he faced arrest for shooting Detective Drury. These weren't empty threats. They came from someone who knew the darkest details about Sydney's most powerful criminals.